Viewer discretion is advised.
There's really not any psych, but
Or lotion.
there's lotion.
Tell me you're in
There's
your
lotion,
mid-30s
baby.
without telling me you're in your mid-30s.
My hands get dry. I was on the scooter for an hour.
All of us, we've been lotioning our hands for way too
It
long.
feels really
I
good.
know. It's like the one small joy in my day.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so old Hollywood refers to the genre of classical Hollywood cinema, which is a term used to describe both a narrative and visual style of filmmaking, which became characteristic of American cinema between the 1910s. It increased rapidly after World War I and the 1960s or 1950s. It eventually became the most powerful and pervasive style of filmmaking around the world.
Cool.
My ring light is haunted. It just turned up on itself. What the fuck?
Ooh.
Okay.
Maybe one of our case victims is trying to communicate.
I have been watching Stranger Things, so it might also be someone asking for help from the
From the upside down.
And
It's
upside down.
Dustin. Or maybe Vecna. I don't know. I was barely following. I watched it all.
I don't know any of their names. Like, I feel like I skipped last season too.
I definitely missed last season and all of last season.
Yeah.
And we just
Kind of
started at this
important.
season.
Corey filled me in.
I just like the characters
My
when they're
estranged
hanging
husband.
out,
You're
when they're
strange.
vibing. I don't really like the scary part.
No, I don't either. I just like
I
that
just
when
like-
they're at school or when
Yeah,
Eleven's
riding
in
their
that
bikes.
lab.
I
They're
have
in
no words.
the pizza van.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
I know. I do not pay attention when the monsters come.
I'm in pain.
I don't care about the Russian side plot.
No.
That's like the whole plot.
Some of those characters are nice. Though. Like they're funny. They got some funny lines.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lucy and I are on the same page for Stranger Things.
I don't need to listen to every word. It's not
I get
Real
it.
Housewives.
I mean,
Those are plot
pivot
lines that
to
I
Ultimate Girls Trip, which has saved
Oh
my
my
sanity
so
in the
fucking
last couple
good.
weeks.
Yes.
I need
Oh.
to catch up.
Phaedra.
Yeah.
Who knew Phaedra was such
She
a jewel?
is an absolute queen. I don't know why they ever would have removed her from
Mhm.
the house. She's amazing.
Mhm. Put her on pause, you mean?
Yeah, well, okay, Dorinda.
Okay.
Vicky can eat my whole asshole, though. I
yeah.
hate her.
But she's good TV.
I mean, yeah. All right. Anyway, what is this episode about?
Old Hollywood. Stranger Things and Real Housewives and lotion.
Okay.
The
okay.
girls misremember Stranger Things.
No, you two.
Us
You two
two
misremember.
gals misremember Stranger Things. Okay. Okay, so this visual narrative style of the classical Hollywood cinema was heavily influenced by the ideas of the Renaissance and its resurgence of mankind as the focal point. It is distinguished at three general levels. So we have devices, systems, and then how those systems relate to each other. So just try to stick with me.
This seems very highbrow for
Yeah, I mean, okay.
We'll get to
people
the
making
interesting
movies.
It's like I don't think
It's a
the
whole art
Renaissance
form.
jumps out
Weren't
at
they
me
just,
when
they
I
were just love stories.
Let's focus on individual people,
Okay,
the individual.
got it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So it's also kind of important to consider that this genre cropped up as like the first talkies, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So they made movies completely differently once
Yep.
sound was introduced.
Yes.
All right. So Western individualism, got it.
Got it.
Next.
Yep. So the devices most inherent to classical Hollywood cinema are those of continuity editing. So there's something called the 180-degree rule, where they kind of refer to it as a photographed play style. So there is a visual spatial there's like an axis,
set.
like the camera's over here, the people are over here.
Mhm.
Okay.
So this allows viewers to clearly orient themselves within the position and the direction of action in a scene. It allows you to suspend your disbelief. It feels like you're there.
Okay.
According to the 30-degree rule, cuts in the angle that the scene is viewed from must be significant enough for the viewer to understand the purpose of the change in perspective. So cuts that don't adhere to the 30-degree rule are like jump cuts, and they can
Okay.
be disruptive to the viewer. It's like
I feel like the modern version of
distracting.
the modern version of that is like it's breaking the third wall. Like if you're watching an action flick and then they do like mud or blood spatter like on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that. I feel like it totally removes me from the like cinematic experience.
Yeah. So there's like different things like that just kind of allow you to feel like you're in it instead of just
Mhm.
viewing it.
Mm-hmm.
So then also the narrative logic is a important thing. So like they have like the classical narration that progresses through psychological motivation. So like each character has a will and they
Mhm.
struggle against obstacles towards a defined goal. So it's like the story arc.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the narrative element is commonly composed of a primary narrative. So for example, a romance. And then this is intertwined with a secondary narrative or multiple narratives. So like a girl's in love with a guy, but he's married or whatever.
Yeah, there's always an obstacle.
Mm-hmm. So the narrative is structured with an unmistakable beginning, middle, and end. And generally there's a distinct resolution because Amanda can't handle it if there's not a distinct resolution.
Oh, we'll get to it.
So the characters in classical Hollywood cinema have clearly definable traits. They're active, they're goal-oriented. They're causal agents motivated by psychological rather than social concerns. So like nothing is random. It's not like real life. They have control and they are making very purposeful,
Specific
distinct
choices.
decisions.
And then the
Mhm.
audience can usually kind of like predict what the consequences of their actions are going to be.
Yeah, that's what
Mhm.
makes movies exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
So like all of this stuff is familiar to us because we recognize it, but
Right,
it
we
was
grew
all
up
Like
in
what
cinema.
our whole society, what our
Right.
culture
Yeah.
was built on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
but it wasn't always like this.
Right.
Okay.
So then we have like a continuous linear uniform time unless a character has a flashback.
Okay.
So like in Casablanca, but everything else is like it moves on a linear pattern. And then we have the cinematic space. So this is just like space consisting of centering, balancing, frontality, and depth. So again, shit that I've never really thought about before, but I think it's interesting.
I've taken niche film study classes, but they were like so focused on the niche part
Mhm.
and not on
Mhm.
the film studies part
Yeah.
that I don't have any
It's like an
background in any
intro.
of this.
It's like an intro to film.
Yeah.
So persons or objects of significance are mostly in the center of the frame and they are never out of focus. Balancing refers to the visual composition. So like the characters are evenly distributed throughout the frame. It's balanced.
Mhm.
The action is subtly addressed toward the spectator, which is what frontality is. So people are acting towards the camera,
Mhm.
towards you.
Toward the audience, yeah.
It's like how you never see the other side of the apartment in Friends.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
And then set lighting and costumes are designed to separate the foreground from the background, which is the depth.
Okay.
So all of this stuff was, like I said, it was all new at the time, which is sort of mind blowing.
Yeah, and it was like like Kenyon kind of mentioned, it's like a brand new adaptation of the performing arts that we did know, which were all on stage.
Right.
Mhm. It's the
It
photographed
makes
play.
sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That this is how it was.
Evolving.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
it's a
why
natural progression.
why silent films were so different, because when they were first made, it was so much of just like playing around with the technology. It was
Mhm.
like
And like one camera.
yeah,
Right.
it was like
Following someone
watching
around.
somebody like play with a ball and then the ball disappears, and it was like, whoa! It was almost more like magic tricks,
Right.
and
It was like vaudeville almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then like one crazy guy in the corner playing a piano and just
Right.
sweating his ass off.
yeah.
And then people thinking they're going to die because a train is coming toward them.
So that's my only boring part, I promise. It gets more interesting. So
We
for
learned things.
Yeah. So for better or worse, old Hollywood was basically ruled by what's known as the studio system in the 30s and 40s. So, quote, the studio system is a business method where Hollywood movie studios control all aspects of their film productions, including production, distribution, and exhibition. So, like, they owned the theaters, too.
It was a monopoly.
Yeah.
We'll get to it.
Rife with exploitation.
I was
We'll
going to
get
say,
to it.
super problematic. Continue.
If you've ever seen Mommy Dearest,
Mm-hmm.
don't fuck with me, fellas.
I'm watching that tonight.
That
I'm
is
setting,
absolutely due for a rewatch. Yeah.
I'm setting
so
like I know
fucking
we've
good.
talked recently about needing to rewatch Mommy Dearest, and I didn't do it, so I'm looking up where it's streaming right now.
Mm-hmm. It's a good move. But a lot of that has to do with her struggles with the studio execs. So it's kind of
They
a good.
used to put people on drugs.
We'll get to it,
Oh,
honey.
yeah.
Doctors.
We'll
Okay.
get to it.
Yeah.
So these big five studios were Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Fox, and one called RKO, which I've never heard of before today.
It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Apple TV.
Nice.
Okay.
So all personnel, including actors, crew, directors, and writers, were under contract to the studios, and these contracts could last between 4 and 7 years. Commonly,
Yeah.
they were
It's a long ass contract.
They
7 years
owned
of
you.
your life.
they completely
Yeah.
owned you.
You couldn't work anywhere
Mm-mm.
else, honey.
Well, some actors were loaned between
Mhm.
studios, but that was fairly rare.
and also not
Mhm.
up to them.
Mm-mm.
No, they had really no agency. So they were under these long contracts. It made for efficient and assembly line style filmmaking that dominated the industry for about 2 crucial decades, so the 30s and 40s. In other words, these studios were vertically integrated and everything was handled in-house.
Yeah, and they were
Yes.
just churning out movies
So there was
multiple
no
times a year.
like dealing with conflicting schedules. It was just like you were just puzzle pieces on their board.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You meaning
Lots of money.
we're all classic Hollywood actresses,
Right.
starlets, yeah, ingenues.
Right.
Muses.
Mills.
So
Anka Jams.
Anka jobs. So
Anka jams.
some characteristics of the studio system include, so the studios, like I said, owned their own movie theaters, and those would play. So, like, you know, an MGM movie theater would only play MGM movies.
Oh, okay.
Studios offered independent theaters a block set of films, and this was known as block booking. And these blocks contained the desirable movies mixed in with the unwanted movies. Because not
Okay.
every theater was owned by a studio. There were independent ones, but they had to take the bundles.
The cream. What is it? The wheat with the chaff. What's the thing?
Oh, wow.
I don't fucking know.
Whatever.
Nailed it.
Everyone from actors to directors were paid a salary instead of per film, along with having contracts. So
They could just way overwork you and way
Yeah.
underpay you.
most of these studios were fronted by major movie moguls who previously owned movie theaters in the 1910s before heading to Los Angeles to run their own studios.
And it also, like, it goes without saying, but this is like a very white
Yes. We
bit
will
of history.
Sort
Yeah.
of get to it.
So,
Yeah.
like, there were black folks in film, but they were, if you think that it was, like,
Not
bad
very
to
many.
work under a Hollywood contract,
Yeah.
there were not very many. And if they were paid at all, it was pennies.
However, the white actors were exploited. The
Mhm.
people of color were exploited far worse, or just completely blocked from the
Yep.
industry.
Yep. So aside from the big 5 studios, there were also 3 smaller studios that did not own as many of their own movie theaters. So these were Universal, Columbia, and United Artists, which was a studio founded by Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, precisely because the studios were so controlling of their work, salary, and creativity. So they just made their own. That's what United Artists is.
Mm-hmm.
They,
It's interesting how many of these still exist.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Like,
Except RKO, whatever the fuck
Yeah.
that is.
well, that might exist too. That's ringing like a very vague bell.
Yeah, I don't know. So eventually the feds, like Amanda noted, forced these major studios to shut down over antitrust laws since they basically formed a massive monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
RKO was dissolved in the 50s. Okay, I
Right.
take it back.
So initially, like in the 1910s and 20s, these dudes were obscenely rich.
Mm-hmm.
And at first,
They owned the entire industry.
the monopoly.
Yeah.
At first, they didn't care about potential repercussions of their creativity, but that did not last long. So this is from a PBS article. It was a rash of Hollywood scandals in the late teens and early 20s that helped intensify the ire of local censors and forced the film industry leaders to address the industry's image problems. In 1921, comedian Fatty Arbuckle was accused of the rape and murder of a young actress.
Yep.
Director William Desmond Taylor.
Did we cover that? Amanda, I think you covered
I
that.
think I did. Yeah.
Like a long time ago.
Yeah. Real early in the game.
Could have been comedian crimes.
It might have been. No, I didn't cover him then, but
It was you did though, I think.
Yeah. Director William Desmond Taylor was found murdered. Actor Wallace Reed died of a drug overdose, and America's sweetheart actress Mary Pickford, one of the United Artists, obtained a quickie divorce to marry dashing matinee idol Douglas Fairbanks. Very scandalous.
I love it.
Studio
Back
heads,
when you could only get a divorce in like 2 states,
Right.
right.
which we're heading back towards.
Unless you had enough money, which she did. Studio heads hired a public relations man named Will Hayes to bolster the industry's tainted reputation.
Bolster their taint.
Bolster their taint by convincing the nation that Hollywood was not at all scandalous, or not all scandalous, and that the movie industry would censor itself. But Hayes, at the time, was merely a spokesperson. So since he had very little power to change the content of the films themselves, the criticism escalated, exploding into a national crisis when sound technology gave the movies a voice, like we talked about.
There was a lot of like rapey, like hints, rape being very much hinted at in silent movies. Like if you go back, it was like pretty explicit and graphic for the time, which you like would not think about.
Well, let me just finish this segment. But basically, changes were implemented, which I'm about to tell you about. Before those changes and after those changes, it's fucking night and day. Like if you watch movies like a chronological order, it's really insane how much this affected the content. Okay, so in the late 1920s, state censorship boards were working overtime to keep up with the talkies. These talking pictures incensed religious leaders concerned about America's youth. Somebody please think of the children.
The children, yep.
They are our future.
I believe.
Quote, silent smut had been bad. Vocal smut cried to the censors for vengeance, wrote Father Daniel Lord. His last name was Lord.
Good Lord.
An influential
Bad
Jesuit
Lord.
teacher in the 20s. Bad Lord. Catholic religious leaders especially turned up the heat on Hollywood, calling for strict moral standards and a code of conduct for movie content based on the premise that, quote, no picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Right.
we've come a long way, baby.
So
And I guess we're just going to pre-test everyone's moral standards before they walk in the theater.
Yep.
Honestly, that's the only way to do it.
well, there are 2 ways to do it. And the other way is what's known as the production
Watering
code.
everything down, yeah.
The production code spelled out specific restrictions on language and behavior, particularly sex and crime, which were 2 surefire box office draws. That's what
Right.
people wanted to see.
Still
They're
do.
the reason we have a job.
Yep.
Yeah.
We are pornographic.
Yeah.
It prohibited nudity, suggestive dances, and the ridicule of religion.
Oh my God.
Incredible.
It
Can't make
forbade
fun of our cult.
it forbade the depiction of illegal drug use, venereal disease, childbirth, and miscegenation. I never know how to say that. So
Yeah.
interracial coupling.
Yeah. Great.
The language section banned dozens of quote-unquote offensive words and phrases. Criminal activity could not be presented in a way that led viewers to sympathize with the criminals. Murder scenes had to avoid inspiring imitation.
Uh-oh. So all of our recommendations on like how to hide a body would not have gone over.
No. No.
We wouldn't have done well.
We would not have succeeded. And brutal killings could not be shown in detail, which is why we do this job.
Right.
The sanctity of the marriage and the home had to be upheld. Adultery and illicit sex, although recognized as sometimes necessary to the plot, could not be explicit or justified and were not supposed to be presented as an attractive option.
That's totally like that bled into so much television culture too. Like on the Brady Bunch, the parents were like all families.
Lucy and
Parents
Desi.
were they're all in two separate like twin beds in their room.
Yeah. Yep.
Sex scenes were just like maybe some interesting music and then like the closing
One
of a bedroom
kiss.
door.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like that was it.
We'll
and
get
you still
to-
see
we'll
you
get
still
to
see
more
a
of
lot of
this.
that in like modern film.
Yeah. And you don't have to show, like, sometimes it
don't.
is gratuitous.
Totally.
It
I just think it's so
depends on-
funny how like
The two
very
separate
specific.
beds is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
but yeah.
so specific.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They had 6 children, 3 each, and they're in 2 separate beds.
Yep.
Yeah. They
Come on
didn't
now.
have any children
No,
because they were in
Together.
2 separate beds.
Right.
Hayes convinced the studios that accepting the code was the safest and cheapest answer to their troubles. If the movie industry policed itself, it could ward off the high probability of government intervention. After losing money in the stock market crash of 1929 and paying big bills for introducing sound to the movies,
Oh, yeah, they had
they had to
to
update
retrofit everything.
the theaters and the technology to film it, itself.
Wow.
Very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Sound to the movies. The studios were also deep in debt and desperate to cut costs. Hayes sold the code as the money-saving measure they were searching for. Instead of paying to revise the film after the censorship boards made their edits, the studios could simply follow the code before making their movies, and everyone would be happy.
Mhm.
The code was adopted in 1930. So that's when it kind of like started, but it wasn't actually enforced until 1934 when they organized the Production Code Administration. And any theater that ran movies that did not have the PCA approval would be fined $25,000.
Jeez.
Dang, that's a lot of fucking money.
It is a shitload of money. So the production code's days were numbered in 1952 when movies were officially granted free speech protection under the First Amendment. The motion picture industry officially abandoned the code in 1968.
Mm.
That was in effect for a very long time.
Yeah, it really was.
And so then after that, they quickly replaced the system of age-based ratings that still exists today. It's like PG-13.
Yeah, so you
Whatever.
can make whatever you want, but some theaters will choose what to show. And
Mm-hmm. So
Wow.
because of tight controls that these studios had over the movie stars of old Hollywood, they were able to enforce some absolutely ridiculous rules that we have mentioned. I just have a shitload of examples for you.
Mm-hmm.
So these are some of them, and this is from Harper's Bazaar. So the actors were not permitted to refuse roles. Betty Davis was suspended by Warner Brothers for turning down roles.
Wow.
When Louis B. Mayer, who's the co-founder of MGM, wanted to break his contract with actor John Gilbert, he planted rumors about the star and reportedly intentionally put him in bad movies. So as a result, Gilbert's career completely tanked.
yeah, they just had total control.
Mm-hmm.
And unlimited opportunities for sabotage.
God, that's so scary.
Many of the old Hollywood stars you know and love, such as Marilyn Monroe, Rita Hayworth, Judy Garland, used stage names that were picked by the studios. They had no input as to what their new name was going to be.
Or their whole identity or their lives. And all of them led such happy lives with
Yeah,
no
I'm sure.
problems
No,
to
none.
report.
Mm-mm. So MGM at one point even held a contest to find a name for their new star, whose real name was Lucille LeSueur, which is a fantastic name.
Mm-hmm.
They chose Joan Crawford,
Wow.
and apparently she hated the name Joan Crawford.
Well, you can't have something too difficult for the people in the sticks to pronounce.
Mm-hmm.
Lucille LeSueur. What a fantastic name. Okay.
Mhm.
Actors were often forced into altering their appearance to make them more marketable, and that included plastic surgery.
Mhm.
And this was at a time when that was super not safe.
Yep.
So,
And the men just as much as the women.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about just as much, but the
it
men a
wasn't
lot
just
more
as much,
than you
but
think.
they were, yes, they were controlled. women were primarily limited to either All-American Girl Next Door or sexy bombshell typecasting. Mm-hmm. Studios went to great lengths to market those images to their audience, sometimes even making up fake backstories for their talent. Quote-unquote, weight maintenance clauses were very common in female actors' contracts.
Mm-hmm. On either end, too. Wasn't the actress who played Ethel on I Love Lucy, she had in her contract that she had to weigh like at least 30 pounds more than Lucille Ball at any time.
She had to stay like the quote-unquote funny fat friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Katharine Hepburn famously rejected her studio's guidelines on dress code, I love this, and reportedly walked around set in her underwear, refusing to get dressed after someone in the costume department at RKO took her pants away. She wanted to wear pants. The studio said you can't wear pants. So she was like, fine, I'm not going to wear pants.
And she's so iconic in her pants.
I know.
There's a picture of her. There's a picture of her that'll be on the blog of her in her pants. She's so, so pretty. So like Kenyon said, male actors were not exempt from the studio's rules and regulations. They were expected to exude the ideals of a gentleman at all times. So as a result, messy divorces, womanizing behavior, or anything illegal could have a serious impact on their careers.
Or would be hushed up, and we'll get to it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They were not allowed to avoid the press. They had to stage photo ops or,
attend certain parties or
hang out with certain people, go on certain dates,
marry certain people.
Yeah.
So sham dates, as they were called back then, were a way for a studio to drum up publicity for upcoming pictures featuring their stars. So, for example, while promoting the movie Babes in Arms, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland had to act like a couple and like go out on dates and be seen. But Mickey Rooney was a huge womanizer playboy, so.
Yeah, and not cute.
No.
Gross.
I'm sure way older than her. I don't know for sure, but
I don't know. Poor Judy.
Poor all of them.
Yes, and it was a different time. They all did a lot of fucked up shit and received a lot of fucked up shit.
Yes. Oh my God. You know what? I'm sure that some of this stuff still happens today, but it's not so, like, I feel like the actors involved have way more agency to consent to these sham dating
they have
things and
agents.
photo ops and publicity stunts and whatever.
Yeah.
Like, they're more in on it.
Yeah, in some cases for sure. I mean, I don't know like all the details about it, but I know there was like a whole bunch of fucked up shit with Kesha, who was like sexually assaulted by one of her music producers, but they like owned basically every aspect of her life. And so she was just stuck working with him. And it's like, it's just like more hush hush now, I feel like. It's not as blatant.
I mean, yes, obviously that stuff still happens and it's horrible. I meant more like
so and
so are dating and, and then like 2 months later, it's like, what? No, they were never dating.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think at this time it was so thoroughly exploitative, like across the board, everything was manipulated. It is different today, but obviously a lot of these things still exist.
And
clearly.
It's not like these stars back then had social media. They didn't have their own way to communicate
with each other and
to
protect
the public.
each other.
Everything
and they were like,
was filtered through the studios.
And they're like, weren't unions really, like there sort of were in the 40s and 50s, but at like this early, it's like, this is just how it is. Fucking deal with it.
They were put in positions where it was in their best interest to go along with all this shit.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you want a career, then you have to do this.
So sadly, studios forced many LGBTQ plus actors into heterosexual marriages, for example.
And writers and directors, like anyone in the industry.
Well, specifically for actors because they were so public-facing.
Public-facing, yeah.
So, for example, Rock Hudson was forced to marry his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates, and it wasn't until he publicly announced his AIDS diagnosis that he revealed that he was homosexual, which I don't know when that was, but it had to have been...
It was a huge deal.
I think it was in the 80s, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I think it was earlier than that, but yeah.
But he couldn't come out for that long.
Until he was like dying, essentially.
Well, he died in 1985.
I think he came out about his AIDS diagnosis in the 70s, but I don't remember exactly.
No, he was diagnosed in 84.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, he lived all that time in the closet.
He basically just came out so he could die in his truth.
Yeah.
Which is really fucking sad.
Jean Harlow was told that becoming a wife would alter her sex appeal, and due to the morality clause in her contract with MGM, the studio was allowed to deny her marriage to William Powell.
Christ.
Oh my fucking God.
Also, actresses knew that becoming pregnant was against most studios' rules, and as a result, some women, such as Ava Gardner, had abortions to prevent penalties. But one loophole was adoption. So, as we know from Mommy Dearest, Joan Crawford had several children who were adopted for that reason. Elizabeth Taylor's first wedding was paid for by her studio because it was conveniently right before the release of her film Father of the Bride. Wow. So they treated her wedding as a massive PR stunt.
How do I get that for my wedding?
I don't know if you want it.
Elizabeth
you don't get to
Taylor.
make any decisions.
I mean...
So Marlene Dietrich was one of the earliest known film stars who was told to lose weight. She followed a diet of broth, cottage cheese, and toast as dictated by her studio.
I like all of those things, but not if that's all you can ever eat.
That's you're allowed to eat.
Ugh.
As a child star, this is why I said poor Judy. As a child star, Judy Garland was force-fed meth and encouraged to smoke cigarettes to curb her appetite as a child.
Yeah, there was a lot of
speed.
Amphetamines. Yeah.
And that also meant working 6 days per week and up to 18-hour shifts filled with singing and dancing.
Yeah, there were no like regulations to protect really any actors, but especially child actors. They didn't give a fuck.
There were laws, but they were very minimal child labor laws. So basically, they had to work as much as their adult counterparts. So they gave her pep pills to give her energy, and then when it was time for her to sleep, because she only had 6 hours to sleep, they gave her sleeping pills.
Great. I'm sure she felt fabulous, and I'm sure it didn't affect her development at all.
Well, since you asked, after getting hooked on pep pills, the pep pills MGM was giving her, Judy struggled with addiction. She called in sick 16 days while working on the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, and production on The Pirate was delayed by the actress for the same reason. All the filming delays due to her sick days, her absence, came out of her paycheck, which at one point reached $100,000.
Oh my God.
So she was punished.
I think she married the director of Meet Me in St. Louis.
Oh, fun.
I think.
Studios often appointed assistants to their actors who would advise and take care of the stars, and they would also report back to the studio execs and essentially act as spies.
It is so similar to like royalty almost, like the court.
Yeah.
Back in
like
different centuries.
Chaperones and arranged marriages and
And one person being allowed to like decide who and if you can get married.
I say who, I say when, I say who.
Yeah. Also, I read that Judy Garland's nanny at one point, like the nanny of her children, was spying on her that whole time, and she felt really, really betrayed, obviously, because she's like her child's caretaker.
That's great. That won't induce any paranoia or trauma.
No. That's why she was such a lunatic
later in life. So is her daughter.
Some of the rules put forth by the censorship were about on-screen kisses because they were not meant to look too lustful, which meant that they couldn't last longer than 3 seconds. So that explains
I adhere to that.
Why you might see all those intense but very short kisses in old movies.
Little pecks.
Really, really intense, but really short. And that was
gross. I hate it.
Yeah, just
it's so much worse.
What is it called? Firm pressing? What's it called?
Firm pressing.
A firm press. They were basically on film soaking for wine. Yeah.
Mashing mouths.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then
painful.
On a similar note, and my last fun fact for you, there was a rule called the 1 foot on the floor rule that was implemented to keep actors from looking too horizontal while filming intimate scenes.
Incredible.
So there's a picture.
I feel like I've heard of parents implementing that rule for like their teens.
There's a picture on the drive of who is this? Marlene Dietrich with 1 foot on the floor while she's kissing some guy.
Oh, I see it.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, fucked up time. Pretty fucked up time. But that's a little background for old Hollywood.
Anytime a corporation or any kind of capitalist structure has a monopoly and control, it's not going to go great.
Nope.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Elon.
Yeah. All right. Well done.
Thanks.
Learned
Very
so much.
interesting.
Yeah, there's your intro to film.
Well, I sure hope you liked that clip. If you did like that clip, make sure you are subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving us a nice review, and joining us on Patreon for even more video content, audio content, salacious content all around. Come join us. Treat yourself.